All right, it's 7, so I'll go ahead and get started. Thank everyone for coming. Dr. Rhodes usually starts it out, but she's in a class right now. So I'm just going to start us out. Let's get here. So just a little like devotion for thought and starting us out. A passage that's just been on my heart for kind of a couple of months at this point has just been Proverbs 16:3, and it's commit to the Lord whatever you do, and he will establish your plans. And I feel like right now that's really relatable, I'm sure, for everyone, as just the weather and like all these things that are making things not go according to plan, as a lot of us as teachers are very much planners. And so just like committing those plans to the Lord and knowing that he will take care of everything and he will make all things go according to his plan and his will, even when we're stressed about school getting canceled or getting hours in or whatever that looks like in your life. So just a little quick devo for thought. And so, yeah. So today our speaker is Shonda Richardson, and she is a special education teacher and a teacher effectiveness leader at West Jessamine High School. And it's in her 14th year of being an educator, and she's taught at every grade level over the past 14 years in multiple states across the country. She's had experience in non-traditional education settings, such as international baccalaureate schools and an alternative school for students at risk and high school dropouts. She has her bachelor's degree in learning and behavior disorders, as well as a certification in elementary education, a master's in curriculum and instruction with an emphasis in special education, and an education specialist degree in education leadership. So she has had a lot of an amazing experience, and we're very excited to hear what she has to share with us tonight. So give a warm welcome to Shonda Richardson, and I will make you a co-host so you can share your PowerPoint.
Hey, Natalie, don't forget about me. Don't forget about good old Prof. Ryle.
Oh, and he's here too.
And I'm here too, but I wanted to say a couple things. First of all, thank you, Natalie, for doing that.
Yes.
I was with my student teachers and they're all jumping in. And what a wonderful job you did of introducing Shonda Richardson as our teacher. The one thing that I did, you may have said it before I was able to get logged on, but she's had a whole ton of Asbury student teachers. So she knows she's had 6 Asbury student teachers. So another good thing about her is that she knows what's expected of you. And if you're thinking about adding LBD to your licensure area, she would be a great one to talk to because there's a good chance that you would get to work with her. But we're really blessed that somebody who's not connected to Asbury is doing our presentation, because she is kind of connected to Asbury through those 6 student teachers. So I wanted to make sure that everybody knew that she wasn't just some teacher we picked out of the air. She was one that's worked with a lot of Asbury student teachers.
Yep, I've had the pleasure for the last 4 or 5 years having multiple back-to-back Asbury student teachers. It's been an adventure. All right. So are we ready for me to try sharing?
Yeah, we're ready.
I told them. Okay. I am going to try. I'm not familiar with Zoom, so I'm learning. Okay. Why is it not working? Okay.
Is it allowing you to share your screen, or did I?
No, it is not.
Okay, let me make
sure.
Well,
I think it might be my problem though.
Okay, you are a co-host.
Yeah, it's telling me to go to my system preferences. I don't know.
It's working now.
Okay, you can see it?
Well, I saw one up there. Maybe that was
I hit share and it keeps going. It's not letting me share my present. It worked a minute ago, but now it's not working.
If it doesn't
you
work,
have it. Can you share it and we'll just go?
Yes. Let me open up my email and I'll get that. I can share it.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to work.
Okay.
That's Prof. Rhodes' fault. We're going to blame her.
Well, we tried it, but I was trying to get my Mac to work instead of my Chromebook because my Mac works a little bit better than my Chromebook.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so, yeah. So it worked on my Chromebook, but now it's not working on my Mac.
You going to be able to get it, Natalie?
I think we lost her, maybe. She disappeared off my screen.
If you want to email it to me, I for sure can do it.
Okay. I just shared it with you again. Hopefully that'll work. I don't know what's going on. Oh, I think I might, maybe it might be working. Can you, I think you all can see it now.
Yep, somebody's sharing. There we go.
Can you see it?
Yep.
Okay, that's me. I got it to work finally.
Yep.
Sorry, guys. Okay. All right, guys. So a little bit that I'm going to talk about tonight is I'm going to do an IEP overview. We're going to talk about accommodations versus modifications in the classroom. We're going to talk about accommodations and how they work in the online environment, because as everyone knows, education was turned upside down about a year ago, and we've all been treading water and trying to figure out what's going on over the last year, and found out some things that work and some things that don't work. And then another thing I'm going to talk about briefly is working with collaborative teachers. Each of these things I have done whole PDs over. And so I kind of tried to condense them all into something we could give you an overview pretty quickly. So what is an IEP? And I know we have lots of you all who are just learning, just starting in education, and some of you are actually student teaching right now. So an IEP is more than just a written legal document. It is like a map that lays out the program for special education instruction, supports, and services that a student needs to show growth and thrive in school. Each IEP is designed to meet a student's unique needs. The term IEP is also used to refer to a written plan that spells out the specific types of help that students will get. Both the programs and the written plan are covered by the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. An IEP is legally binding document that must be followed and must be implemented. Okay, so one of the first things that, like when I started in education, is like, I found out that it is legally binding. So if you do not provide those services that are as written in the IEP, so I'll show you an IEP in a minute, and you forget something or you don't implement something, the parents can sue you and take you to court over it. So you have to be really particular. And this is not just your special education teachers. These are your general education teachers who also have to implement these also. So before school even starts, as soon as I find out, because I teach high school, because my kids have 6 to 8 teachers apiece, I give them hard copies, and I give them a virtual copy in like a folder that they can have. On the hard copies, I highlight all the important information. That way they have it in a folder on paper, and they have it where they can access it online as well, to make sure that they understand exactly what they need to do for those students, because not every class is a co-taught class. So you don't always have a special education teacher in the classroom to help you as well. So that's really important to make sure that you understand. So there's 8 main parts to an IEP. The first one that you usually see on an IEP is the current level of academic performance. The annual goals, that's what the students will work towards achieving throughout the course of that IEP. Your progress monitoring is how those goals are going to be tracked and monitored. A description of what services you're going to provide, the duration of the services, the least restrictive environment. So that is whether they are in full co-taught classes, whether they're in resource classes, whether they even go to a special school that supports their educational need, testing accommodations, and then starting at no later than their 16th birthday, they have to include transition statements as well. So a lot of times, I have a lot of freshmen coming in from 8th grade, and typically 8th grade year, our middle school teachers are really good about going ahead and putting those in there. Even if a student isn't 16 yet, they still go ahead and start planning for that when they're in 8th grade, because students in high school here have to complete a career pathway. So they're working towards classes and taking classes here at our Career and Technical Center that help them towards what they want to pursue when they get out of high school. So typically 14 to 15 in Jessamine County is when we start actually planning those transition statements. So, all right, so here's an example of an IEP that I have actually written. This is one I did a couple of weeks ago. I have taken out all the identifying information. Most of you, some of you, even student teachers have probably not really seen an actual IEP. I know Asbury does a really good job about that. And I had a few student teachers who've done parts, but seeing the thing as a whole for the first time was really eye-opening for them, because they can be anywhere from 6 to 12 pages typically, or more in length. So the first thing you'll see here is you'll see information like their birthday, their name, what grade their levels, their grade they're in, and things like that. So the very first section is your present levels of academic achievement. And you can see this student did not have any communication needs. However, they do have academic needs. So we see that they have reading, math, and writing deficits. And so, oh, we got a question. If you want to unmute, you can go ahead, Hallie. I think she's got her hand up, maybe.
Yes, Hallie's one of my student teachers, so she might have a question.
Sorry, I do not have a question. I'm not sure how I put my hand
Okay.
up. Sorry about that.
It's okay. I just wanted to make sure if you had something.
Thanks.
Okay, so as you can see, we'll look at here at his reading, and you can see, like I've stated in here, that he has made significant progress over the last couple of years. He's answering more than just basic info, and he is better at answering basic comprehension than inferential questioning, but he has difficulty picking out textual evidence and supporting his answers and things like that. So his goal for the previous IEP was to cite textual evidence, answer comprehension and inferential questions with 80% accuracy. So that was the previous goal. But current data was showing us that he was only performing at 78% accuracy for the text evidence, 80%, which he met that part of the goal for the comprehension, and then inferential questions at 74% accuracy. So he made progress. I found a mistake in there. I do not have his baseline data. So you will see my fact checker missed that. But then you also, after you go through, you have to have like an impact statement that shows how their disability and where they're at impacts them in the educational environment related to that of their peers. So what can they not do that typical same age peers can do? And you can see, so like social emotional, A lot of times you'll see social emotional goals in IEPs. That can be anything. It's not just behavioral stuff. It can be if they need to work on advocating for their needs, if they need help with organizational skills, all of that's going to be in here as well. We got if they have any vision, if they have any hearing things, those show up in the PLEP as well. And then you can see here's some transition information. We're moving into the transition part. So you can see we did student interviews, so he was involved. We've done interest inventories. In Kentucky, they have to fill out an IOP, which they're revamping the IOP process currently. That he's done vocational assessments, and we've talked with his family as well. And you can see his goal is to go to a trade school to study culinary because he wants to work in the culinary field. You have your course of study. So this is only going to be for your high school students. This is all of the classes that they will take while he's in high school. And what's really difficult is when they're a freshman and you're trying to plan out all 4 years of high school for them as a freshman. So that gets really difficult, but you can change these each year if something comes up and they want to change their pathway and things like that. And then you move into things that are factors that may prohibit them. So does their behavior impact them? If yes, okay, so we're going to talk about specially designed instruction. So if you had any goals up here in this area where it's like social, emotional, and things like that, you're going to have this box checked here saying that their behavior is impeding their learning. This student is ELL also. So he has ESL services. So there was a little bit of discrepancy there because he doesn't take the typical English classes. We substitute his ESL classes for his ELA credits. Then if they need any visual impairment type things, communication needs, deaf and hard of hearing needs. So assistive technology. So this one is something that a few years ago that they started changing. Originally, you think, okay, assistive technology are different devices or things that the student's going to use. Well, now that Chromebooks are so influential in student learning, those Chromebooks are assistive technology because these students use text to speech through their microphone. They use text to speech. So that, like, we use Read Write Google to read things for them. We use speech to text with their microphone. So if they say something, it'll type it for them. And then they use their word processors to type out notes and different things. So those are now considered assistive technologies, where a couple of years back, we really didn't have to put those in there. So we moved down into your annual goals. You know, what are we going to work on this year? What specially designed instruction we're going to provide. So he does really well with just modeling and direct instruction. Then we move into, here's our objectives broke down. This is his, let's see, that one's the reading goals. So modeling repeated practice is really good. So you can see how they're not always the same for each goal. You really need to think about what works best for them. So like in math, repetition and scaffolding of those supports are specially designed instructions that really work. And then you move into your supplementary aid and services. So what other things are you going to add in addition to help your students? So in Jessamine County, if you're going to this was a big ordeal a couple of weeks ago. And, you know, modified tests and assignments are not automatically assumed in IEP. And so that needs to be specifically stated in an IEP. If you want your student to have a modified test, like say you're taking a biology test and you want to provide them one that has paraphrased vocabulary and things like that in it, that needs to be written in the IEP that they receive those services. So this section here in the supplement, this is new due to online learning. It's called a contingency plan. So how are their services going to look different if we have to move to online instruction from in-person instruction? So you'll see like what the student will need to do to make sure he's successful. So he needs to make sure he's asking questions. He's contacting his teachers. He's having one-on-one sessions with us. Also, you can see that his co-teaching and collab instruction is 2 days a week instead of 5 like he usually shows. So he's actually receiving a reduction in services during online learning. And then you move into your accommodations and things like that. So you can see we have paraphrasing, we have an online reader, we have scribes, we have technology. So those are to use those speech to text and text to speech features. He has double time. So if a general ed student gets an hour for something, he gets 2 hours to complete. Or if they have 1 night of homework to complete something, he gets 2 nights of homework. Calculator, I specified on here a calculator familiar to the student. That way the one he uses in school is the one that he is able to use on his exams and things like that. And then his least restrictive environment, you can see he has co-taught or collaborative classes for social studies, math, and science. And then remember, typically English, if they have a reading disability, is listed here, but he receives those ESL services for his reading, so that's not there. And then he does have a resource class for Learning Lab, where we focus on his reading skills as well. And then you can see your minutes of service. So typically for a co-taught class, you put it as 5 to 10 minutes of services, and that's 3 times a week right now because of EDL. This student has chose all online services this year. So his services are not, the 4 to 5 days a week like other students are receiving. And then he has 60 minutes 1 time a day in the resource environment to work with me on his reading skills. And then extended school year services. So extended school year services are different than your summer schools. So ESY, and most of the time, students who receive ESY are going to be your more self-contained students, your lower level students who regress significantly that cannot be recouped quickly when school restarts over the summer break. So therefore, they need to have the continuation of education throughout the summer. This student does not show those regressions during the summer break, so we did not have to do that. Okay. Let me get back over to my PowerPoint here. All right, so let's dive a little bit more into accommodations and modifications. So an accommodation is something that removes the learning barriers in the classroom to provide every child with equal access to learning. But a modification is when changes to what the child is taught and expected to do in class are different than what the other children receive. So I broke it down a little bit further. So accommodations, so you are things like a strategy used to help a student with learning needs access the same curriculum as his peers. A strategy used to help a student with learning. Oh, I got that on there twice. Oops. So the biggest one you need to think about here is this occurs in the general education classroom. So at the high school, this is in your co-taught classes when there is 1 general education teacher and 1 special education teacher, or it can be in your classes when there is no special education teacher and the general education teacher is in charge of making sure that those accommodations are made or working with a special education teacher to make sure that happens. So for this particular student, he is in a class that does not have a co-teacher. It's a music through the ages, music type appreciation class. It's very fast paced.
Alexa, turn on David's desk lamp.
So it's a very involved class, and I am actually, even though I'm not a co-teacher, I'm having to work with his teacher to modify his test and make sure that he has equal access to the content. Also, you need to make sure that tools, materials, technology, visual aids, all of that is there for the student to access. And another key thing here is that the grading is the same. So the same expectations for a student as what you would have for the other students. So the same rubric if you're grading an essay or something like that. However, here's modification. Again, it's used to help the students access learning in the same curriculum. However, the learning expectations and the outcomes are slightly different. So that you may not expect them to get as far in like a depth of knowledge or something like that. So we're huge in Jessamine County about talking about the depth of knowledge and like the 4 DOKs. And so this student may not be able to reach that 4 where they're, implementing an experiment or designing experiments on their own. They may still be in that whole, they need to follow through with what you've designed and being able to follow the directions and things like that. Again, this can occur in the general education environment. And the tools and technology and things are there to make sure that the student is achieving. And then also, but the grading is different and is appropriate to the student's specific needs and their levels. So that is where the teacher needs to work with the special education teacher and find out what expectations they need to meet individually. So you may have 10 special ed students in the class, but you have 1 student whose expectations may be different due to needing to make those modifications. So accommodations are typically put into 5 different categories. Presentation, so changes to how the information is presented. Response is the ways that the student completes a task. Setting, it includes changes of location. Timing and scheduling, so the time that is allowed to complete task or when they complete a task. And then organizational skills help. So that can be time management or study skills. So looking at accommodations, these are just some examples of what can be done in each of those categories. So in presentation, you can have an audio recording of a text. So a lot of times in the classroom, just say if we're reading a novel, the teacher will read that novel out loud to the class and things like that. But sometimes you can also, like in Google Classroom, if we're reading chapter 2, I may also put a link for chapter 2's audio for them to refer back to when they're not in class with me. That way they still have access. Now, if it's something that I can't find an audio recording, I've recorded myself reading a section or a part where they can go back and still access me reading it to them when they're not with me. There could be fewer items per page, because think about math. When I was in school and they put 100 math problems on a page, that is very overwhelming. And a lot of times students are going to shut down when you do that. Think about 20. Do they really need to do 100 to show that they can do this skill? A larger print instead of a smaller print actually helps the students with focusing and sharing where they need to go. Provide verbal instructions, not just written instructions, because a lot of times these kids are unsure, or they see that first syllable of a word and they think that's what the word is, and they're missing complete what the directions are. So make sure you're verbally reading those directions. Providing a checklist for a student, or giving them a copy of notes. So if you're giving them a lecture or things like that, I know this pertains to high school, middle school, give the student a copy of your PowerPoint ahead of time, or guided notes where they just have to fill in a blank for each sentence or 2 blanks for each PowerPoint. That way they're not so concerned with what they have to write down, and they can actually listen to what you're presenting because they can follow along with you. So response, accommodations for response, talk about spoken versus written. So if a student I'm testing a student, I want to know what they know about protons. I can go up to them and say, hey, tell me everything you know about protons. And I can probe and ask them questions and find out what they need to know without giving them a paper, pencil, multiple choice test. So that actually, I've done this a lot with students and reading and things like that. When we read The Great Gatsby one year, I had a student, he could not pass the test, but he could tell me everything we discussed about every character. And of course, I'm going, if he can give me that much detail through a conversation, he knows the material. Dictate to a scribe. So a lot of times we do that. We're trying to do technology first accommodations versus putting a human. So previously, whenever I would have to hand write for every student that had a scribe. Now with having every student having a one-to-one Chromebook, they can use their speech to text features and things like that. your word processor, your calculators are involved there. So changes, accommodations for setting, moving to a different location for testing. I use this one quite a bit. When I co-teach, I do not pull students out of the classroom very often. But when we do testing, I do pull out the 5 to 6 students I have and take them to my room for testing. That way, you know, they're not testing in an environment of 30 plus students. Instead, there's 5 to 6 there as well. But I also take general education students who I think need support to be successful that may not have an IEP as well. Proximity to the teacher. So this one you see a lot, just moving someone closer to where you are or where you're presenting the instruction. Special lighting and acoustics. So if you have a student who may be deaf, they may have an FM mic system that you will be required to wear on your person so they can hear you. Or you have a student who has a brain injury and they can't be in a room with fluorescent lights, and you may have to have different lightings for your classroom. Your small group testing and your sensory tools. This can be like those wiggly pads that with the different textures that they sit on, or I've seen classrooms that have those ball chairs. I find those very distraction because, especially with the younger kids, they just like to sit and bounce all the time. But they actually really help some kids. Timing and scheduling. So you got your extended time, your extended processing time. So if I ask a student about what do they know, don't give them just 2 to 3 seconds. Give them time to formulate how they're going to respond. That is one thing that I really had to work on because I just want to move through it and move on, but really training myself to make sure the students have that accurate wait time. That one is difficult to build into. Frequent breaks. I know a lot of times you see this in your elementary IEPs where they need a movement break. And my husband is a behavior coach. He does the PASS at one of the elementary schools here in Jessamine County. And he has a schedule of alarms on his phone where he has to go take students, 2 to 3 times a day for a movement break so they can get out of the classroom and refocus. One thing, so testing over multiple days or testing at certain times of days. Testing at a certain time of day is great for all students, no matter their age. Most students are fresher in the morning after they've had breakfast. Instead of waiting till 3 o'clock to give them a test, 6th period is horrible for students. They're so done, they don't want to focus. But testing over multiple days. So junior year of high school in Kentucky, all students take the ACT. And we have students who have multiple days to take the ACT instead of all in one testing session. So this could be because they just cannot handle sitting there for 8 hours. So if a typical student has 3 hours to do the ACT, they get double time, they get 6 hours to do the ACT. So you're literally sitting there a whole school day doing nothing but testing. And that is very difficult for these kids. So oftentimes we'll do like the reading one day and the math one day and the science section another day. So they can break those up over multiple days and their scores increase when they're not as frustrated with being in the testing environment all day. Organizational uses of highlighters. This is, the kids love the highlighters, but also having them look for certain things. I had a student who was struggling as a high school student with chunks and blends. So we had a story and I had printed it out for him and he really needed to work on a certain sound. I'm just going to pick BR. And so every time he would find a word with BR in it, he would highlight it. And so then we would go through and we would read those words with the BR blends or those chunks that he was struggling with one-on-one after we had gotten through the lesson. And he was able to keep increasing his vocabulary that way. Uses of timers, visual timers, putting one up on your smartboard is really good. So, hey, we got 5 minutes. I put one of those timers up there on the smartboard and the students really like to see, okay, so they can think, oh, I need to move on. We've only got this much left. Planners and organizers, graphic organizers for writing really help students. I like to give them different types of graphic organizers through the writing. And then use of study guides. Having that copy of a study guide is so important for these students so they can know exactly where they need to study instead of seeing all the information for the last 8 to 9 weeks. Because in high school, you may only have one summative, especially in a reading unit, may only have one summative in 9 weeks. And so that is a lot of information they have to have in their minds for a long time. And that's just too much. So common types of modifications. So complete a different set of problems or a different prompt. So if you have a really rhetorical analysis in junior English, and I'm like, what is rhetorical analysis? So you may actually have a different prompt for a student where the other ones are working on something similar, a topic, but the prompt may just be different to meet their educational need. Providing a different version of a test. That's where I was talking about those paraphrasings, alternative projects. So you may have different material, separate grading rubrics, and exemptions from certain projects for a student based on their needs. Let's see, just get something. Oh, that's it. Okay, so accommodations in online environment. So this is one that I've had to learn by trial and error. So providing an audio of the text, like I mentioned before, when we first moved into EDL last year, you know, we had lots of students who didn't have access to Chromebooks very often. And so we had students who had, and I still had at the beginning of this year until the district got them together, a student who had 6 siblings and they had 1 computer for all 7 children in the family. So providing that audio or something that they could go back and listen to me teaching or me reading something, or a link to a YouTube video of someone else reading the text was very successful for these students, because if they were doing homework at 10 o'clock at night, 1 a.m. for high school students, man, I get emails 2, 3 in the morning from high school students. That's when they have to work on their homework. Again, your speech to text and text to speech features. We use Read Write Google in Jessamine County, and it's right there on their add-ons, and they can highlight, they can do all kinds of things. They can pause it, they can read it. It just does so many different features. Providing recordings, providing notes. So this is one I've done a lot this year. Copies of presentations, making sure they have that. In the social studies class that I'm working with this year, the PowerPoints are packed so full of information that when a student has an assignment that they have to refer back to the presentation to find those answers, they have a difficulty doing that because there's just so much information that they get overwhelmed. So what I do is I go in and highlight in the presentation and send them another copy where they can see the highlights of where they need to look for that important information that they're going to need for their assignments. Visuals are amazing. Try not to overstimulate them with audio and all kinds of stuff, because that just, it gets to them a lot and they get overwhelmed. Breakout rooms, small group instruction, and testing. We were so thankful when Google came out with the breakout rooms, where whoever started the meeting could physically move students to another, because students weren't wanting to come when I would post a Google Meet link in the chat to come work with me, because before that I would have to open up a second Meet and put a link and they would have to click it, and they weren't showing up for their accommodations. But now with the breakout rooms, that we can physically move them to meet with me, and it's worked a lot better. And then of course with your little ones, the visual and interactive learning games and things like that is very beneficial. All right, so next we're going to move into co-teaching. So K through 12 now, co-teaching is really popular. I know Jessamine County at the high school, we have like one resource class outside of our self-contained classroom at West Jessamine High School, and I teach it. And that one resource class works on reading and math skills and making sure they're successful in their core classes and things like that. So everything else that a student who is not a self-contained or a lower level student is in a co-taught class for their core academics. So co-teaching, and I took this, I gave a whole big presentation one time on co-teaching and the different models. And so I found this, I got my source on here. So co-teaching is when 2 or more educators co-plan, co-instruct, and co-assess a group of students with diverse needs in the same classroom. And you'll notice that I highlighted co-plan, co-instruct, and co-assess. I will not tell you how often I see that the special education teacher does not do those things with their co-teacher. And you can see what teachers do and what teachers don't do these things by the level of success that their students are having. So there are 5 different main co-teaching strategies, and you can see one is divided up a little bit. So we got lead and support, we got station teaching, parallel teaching, alternative teaching, and team teaching. And I will tell you, I've tried all of these. Some don't work as well as others, depending on the lesson. Now, there are times where one might work better than the others. I will tell you that lead and support is what you will see and observe most often. And you really shouldn't. You can really see, that's when you see this, you're going to see the general education teacher in the front of the classroom and the special ed teacher just walking around helping students out. Now, there are times where that needs to happen, especially when your special ed teacher said, like this year, I have never taught a social studies class at this level before. So new class, I have not taught it in the 6 years of it at West High. I'm still learning. And so I get the material like a day before the kids do, and I'm cramming to learn the information. And so there are some days in that class where I'm more of a supportive role, where I'm scribing or I'm helping students get caught up with where they need to be and things like that. And that's okay, but it doesn't need to be your primary go-to every single day. So what do they look like? So lead and support requires little joint planning time. And so this is why a lot of times you see this, because the co-teachers are not getting together to plan what they're going to do ahead of time. So there's oftentimes you'll see just the special education teacher showing up, hey, what are we doing today? You know, and they haven't prepared. Provides an opportunity for the special education teacher to learn about the curriculum. So like I said, there are times when you just are not familiar, because especially special ed teachers are jacks of all trades. We kind of know a little bit about everything. And like I have taught every subject, but I'm not good at science. So there's a lot of times where I've got to go reference different material and try to refresh myself to be able to help somebody. Like I had a teacher last year, she had been teaching English for years at West High, but I had to put her in a science class last year. When I was helping make the master schedule, and she freaked out on me, but she did an amazing job once she got there, but she didn't know the content. And so it was very difficult at the beginning for her to do that. Particularly effective for new teachers. So you'll see this a lot in first and second year teachers. They may co-plan a lot, but they're still not strong in the content and they're still learning. So you see that a lot then. Can result in a special education teacher being an assistant. And a lot of times I hate when students, well, you're just the helper anyway. And that really bothers me that when they don't see me as a teacher as well. And even if from day one with my co-teacher, because at the high school, so like English 3, Miss Wallington, my co-teacher, shows up on their schedule. Miss Richardson does not show up on their schedule. So from day one of them getting their schedule, they're told they have one teacher, even though there's 2 there. One teacher has the primary responsibility for planning and teaching, and then the other teachers move around the classroom just to help out. So you can see just kind of what that looks like. You can see the main teacher up front and somebody back here maybe collecting data. Sometimes there are times when you have to do behavioral observations or things like that, and you do need to spend some time observing or collecting data. And then over here, you can see where the lead teacher's up front and the special ed teacher is just kind of roaming around the room, helping students that need help. Station teaching. You see this a lot in elementary classrooms, not as effectively at the high school level. However, I talked my co-teacher into trying this a couple of years ago, and she didn't believe me that it was going to work, and it did. And it went amazing for these students. So each teacher has a separate responsibility and a separate part of the instruction that they're delivering. It lowers the student to teacher ratio. Students with disabilities can be integrated into smaller groups. So you can be really peculiar about where you place students within groups. But it can be a little loud. and the movement around the classroom can be really distracting for some students. So, of course, your typical station, you got a teacher station, and an independent workstation. Typically, you really don't want to have more than that. I know one year we had 2 teachers and an aide, so there was 3 of us in the classroom, and so we had 4 stations. Or one time I had a student teacher, my co-teacher had a student teacher, so there was 4 of us. Plus, I had a practicum student, so there was 5 of us in the classroom that year. And so my student teacher and my practicum student had a group, her student teacher had a group, then she had a group. And so we were able to provide a lot of individual instruction that year, and it really helped bolster the students. Parallel teaching, this one is very difficult to do. So again, it lowers the student to teacher ratio. You can group the students by their needs and how you need it to be successful. It allows for creativity in delivering the lesson. Teachers both have to be confident and comfortable with the content and should not be used for the first time you're teaching something. So if you're brand new content, your first few days, you don't need to do this. The reason why it's difficult, as you can see here, is both teachers are providing instruction at the same time in classroom. So it can be a little noisy, especially when you have the 2 teachers at opposite sides of the room. And as teachers, we like to talk very loudly, and it can be distracting for students. So really, if you have a larger classroom, this one, I will be honest, I've not been very successful with parallel teaching. Small groups and things like that within the classroom, yes, but true parallel teaching, haven't had much success with. Alternative teaching. So helps with attention problems with students, allows for reteaching, tutoring, and enrichment. But it can cause a little bit of a stigma on those students who are being pulled to work individually or in small group, where the large portion of students are still working in the other part of the classroom. Again, with this one, the special education teacher can be viewed as an assistant if they are always doing alternative teaching role. And the majority of students remain in the large group. And then this is where 3 to 4 students are provided with some small group instruction for pre-teaching or enrichment, reteaching, or individualized instruction. So it often looks like this. So you have the larger setting of students followed by the small group off to the back or side. Now I have done this one, and I make sure that when I pick my groups, I do it in a way that not just the special ed kids are being singled out, or not just the really low students are being singled out. So you need to be particular in how you pick your students and how you do this, so the students don't feel stigmatized about why they're being pulled. Because by the time in high school that I have the students, especially my juniors and seniors, because that's who I work with the most, they know that they have special needs, and they know who in their classroom has special needs because they've been in classes with them for the last 12 years of school. So they know when they're being singled out, and they don't like it. The next one is team teaching. So I love doing this when you're both up there going to town and one can feed off the other, and you're both providing instruction at the same time. So you have a lot of shared responsibility. You have to be really familiar with the content in order to be able to fully do this effectively. It allows for creativity within the lesson's delivery, prompts the teacher to try innovative new techniques that most people wouldn't have been able to do on their own when they're individually in the classroom. It requires a lot of trust in your co-teacher. So typically after you've worked with your co-teacher for a few years, I have one that I taught 3 years in a row, the same content with the teacher. And by year 2, year 3, you didn't know which one of us was the general ed teacher and which one was the special education teacher, because I could pick off and, if he was absent, I took the role and went with it. And I was able to jump in and teach or add to or help clarify miscommunications or things that the students might be struggling with. With this strategy, It says it's difficult to implement, but I feel like once that you're fully comfortable with the content you're teaching, it's not that difficult, especially if you have a really good relationship with your co-teacher. So with this strategy, students benefit from the combined knowledge and strength of both teachers. So like the teacher that I was just talking about, he actually was a professor at Asbury for several years. And so he has a doctorate in English. I don't. And so he knew things about the literary side of things, the grammatical side of things that I didn't know. But I was able to balance out the other side of it. And our students really struggled with a lot of misconceptions about things. And so I was able to, when he was providing something, prompt with a question. I'm like, now, why would you say that? Or can you explain that? You know, and me having the viewpoint of the lower level side of things and my ability to work with those students who struggle, I was able to pick up on questions that students would have that he wasn't able to see because he was here and he had a hard time that first year breaking it down. But by year 2, it was solid. Due to the relationship development and the collaboration, students no longer recognize the difference between the two teachers. Students receive the most effective instruction here and allows both to accept responsibility for the growth in student learning, development, and achievement. So this, if you're working with the PDSA in the classroom, so I know a lot of times we do PDSA, the Plan, Do, Study, Act, within our PLCs and things like that. But here in Jessamine County, we have actually been implementing it in our classrooms as well with our students. And when both teachers have that shared responsibility within the classroom and you're able to really delve into this type of thing, it really helps the students be more successful. And you see a lot of success and growth in your students. And you can see here, both teachers are in the front of the room, both are providing instruction. Now, you're not always going to be in the front of the room. You're both walking around, moving, sitting on a chair, you know, moving around, doing different things, but you're both providing that instruction. So here's a few tips that I have had for successful co-teaching that I have found over the last several years. Planning is key. You cannot just show up and expect co-teaching to be successful. You have to find time to meet and plan with your co-teachers. Now at the high school, that is very difficult. Elementary as well, I could see, and middle school, especially if you do not have the same planning time as your co-teachers. Now for several years, I'd say for the last 6 years, I did not have common planning time with my co-teachers. So we had to meet before or after school, at least once a week, to make sure where we were going, who needed to do what, to plan. Google Drive was key in this. We had a shared Google Drive where I could upload something, she could add something, I could change something, things like that, because we couldn't sit down together every day at the same time. Communication is essential. You have to build relationship with that teacher. Discuss your views on teaching and learning with your co-teacher. They need to know how you feel and how you want to be involved in the classroom. We'll talk about where I'm going with that statement here in just a second when it comes to discipline. You really need to sit and talk with your co-teacher. How do you want to do things in your classroom? Attend to details. Think about the small things about how, you know, teachers have their classroom and how they want to run their classroom. But what if that second teacher coming in doesn't agree or think that it should be run that way? So you really need to sit down and think about those things. Let your parents know that there's 2 teachers going to be involved, because I can't tell you how often my general education co-teacher gets an email from a parent and I'm not aware of a situation. So oftentimes my co-teacher, when they respond to a parent, will attach me to the email so I can see the information too, because a lot of times parents are not, even though my name appears on the syllabus and things like that, parents do not know that there are 2 teachers that they're going to be hearing from as well. Avoid that paraprofessional trap. That's where the teacher, the special ed teacher, is seen as an aide or a helper in the classroom. So make sure you build that and you work hard by planning and assisting and making sure you're both doing the assessing and providing the instruction, so both teachers are seen as teachers within the classroom. When disagreements happen, talk about it. I can't tell you how often we'll be in the middle of something or something will happen and you have a disagreement with your co-teacher. And this happened to me several years ago. And I'm a person that really does not like confrontation. And I hate talking to people about things that bother me. And as I'm growing in my profession and moving into leadership roles, I've had to get better at this and have those hard conversations that I don't like to have. Talk about your classroom routines. You need to do this before school starts. As soon as you find out who your co-teacher is going to be, talk to them. Tell them what your plans, what your ideas are, what you visualize, so you all can come together and think about something. Now, plan for discipline. So you need to think how you're going to provide discipline in your classroom on where you're on the same front. All too often, I will walk in and observe with our administrators as the leader of my department. 2 to 3 times a year, I go around with our principals and observe some of my special education teachers, so I know what areas we need to work on in my department. And I'll go in and I will see the special education teacher, one, doing the one teach, one observe, and the special education teacher providing the discipline while the general education teacher just goes on with the lesson. And so the special education teacher is always the one, don't do this, don't do that, or taking the phone or doing this. And so they always see the special ed teacher as the bad teacher or the bad person in the room. And that's really uncomfortable, especially, when special education students need to learn and have trust with their teachers. And when one person is always providing the discipline, or you're not on the same outlook as far as what you think needs to happen, then it can have a lot of conflicts in the classroom. The same teacher that I told you all a minute ago that I really struggled with confronting her, and it had to do with discipline. She would let things slide, or she wouldn't want to confront a student because she was a second or third year teacher, and our students were 18, almost 19 years old. So, and she was, she's not much older than her students. She had a really hard time providing discipline, and she wanted me to always do it. And so every time I would try to talk to her or step up, she would have excuses of why she couldn't do it and why I had to do it as the experienced teacher. And it caused a lot of animosity, where after I didn't co-teach with her the next year, I didn't even want to talk to her. And it took a while, because by the end of the year, we couldn't hardly stand to be in the room with each other because we couldn't have that good conversation. That communication was as simple. And every time I tried to have that conversation, she would shut me down, or, oh, I have to do this, I don't have time for that. And it was really hard, to the point where I went to one of our administrators that I really trust, and we had a conversation. I'm like, I need help. I cannot facilitate this on my own now, because I have tried and it's not working. So sometimes you have to do that. The next key here, tip for me that I have for you, is discuss ways to give and receive feedback. The grading should not just come from one teacher. Both teachers should be involved in this. A lot of times, especially in English, we'll divide up the essays, and we both grade them. We both fill out the rubrics. We both fill out the comments. That way they're not seeing just things from the general education teacher, where they're seeing me as a teacher too, because I actually graded their assignment as well. The next one is determine the acceptable noise levels. You would think you wouldn't have to think about this, but having 2 teachers and 30 to 35 students in a class, it can get loud. And one teacher may be comfortable with a loud classroom and one may not be. Share your pet peeves. So sit there and talk about the things that annoy you. For me, one huge pet peeve is smacking gum and the sound of flip-flops, like the flapping of flip-flops on the floor, like those, it drives me nuts. And so there's a few things like that. When you know the things that irritate each other, you can, excuse me, talk to each other. You can see when the other one's getting irritated. Tell them to take a break, because there's 2 of you. Last year with my co-teacher, I knew he was getting frustrated. I looked at him. I said, go take a walk, go get a drink, I've got this. So you have each other's back when you're struggling, because there's days where you're going to be on the verge of breaking down, where you may have had a rough class before and you're on the verge of tears, or you've had to have a confrontation with a student, and you just need that little bit of take a deep breath. And if your co-teacher really knows you, they can see it on your face and they can look at you and say, what can I do to help? And then when you can do that with your co-teacher, you're going to have a truly successful co-teaching experience. Again, teach for and co-instructing and co-assess. Questions? Oh,
Hey, Sean, I have a couple questions.
yeah,
One of the students
Yeah,
wants to
go
make
for
sure
it.
one of the students wants to make sure that we can get a copy of your PowerPoint. So hopefully you will be able to send that to me so that I can post that up with the
Yeah.
recording. And then one of them asked about the age limits on IEPs.
21st birthday. So IEPs go through your 21st birthday. However, I will say there are stipulations to that, because, and I wasn't aware of that until this whole online learning thing happened. So we have a self-contained student who is in one of our self-contained classrooms, and he was supposed to age out at the end of this year. However, his mother has got a special ed advocate and has presented a lawyer to the district, because online education, she proved, was not what needed to happen for her student, and he was not being instructed the way that needed to be happen. And she understood it was due to the health and safety, but they took every day that he was out of the classroom and added it on after his 21st birthday. So he's going to actually be almost 23 before he ages out due to that.
So that was a real live lawyer case with the school district.
Yeah, we didn't have to go to court, but there was a lot of finagling to get that involved there. I've had students who graduated when I taught at the alternative school in Tacoma, Washington. We had a lot of students who had previously dropped out. They had been in jail. They were coming back, and we had kids on parole even, but they hadn't reached 21. And so we were able to get them in and get them caught up. So the program was, I can talk about that program. It was an amazing program. There is nothing like that on this side of the country, because we were a high school on a college campus. And so we caught them up on freshman and sophomore and some junior credits. However, it was more like BCTC. It was CPTC, but they had a high school also who finished those junior senior credits, but they also graduated the college's high school with like a certificate in welding or hair design. So they were able to graduate high school and get that certificate at the same time. So as long as students finished our program by 21, they could still go on to the college after 21.
So can I ask a question? As far as like high school, middle school students who have not been diagnosed with anything and not received an IEP, they are still eligible for that through?
Yes. Yeah. So as long as, so you got to go through the RTI process. So once the need is identified and you go through tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 of response to instruction. So that's the remedial process. So if a student is really struggling in math, you put them in those remedial classes and identify that need, because special education is really tier 4 in the RTI process. So it's after those other steps that you've already went through and tried all those individualized. So like tier 1 is like smaller group, 10 to 15 people. Tier 2, it's a little bit more individualized. By tier 3, it's maybe 2 to 3 students, more individualized help before you realize, oh, there really is a special education need. Then you go through the special education process, typically when you get to that top tier, and the referrals already being made. So you're collecting that data all through that RTI process that will help support the need for that IEP. I have a student who that's going to be on my caseload who is a second semester junior getting on an IEP right now. And you will see, I mean, you don't see that too often, especially at the high school. We're seeing it more and more often though. Our area is growing rapidly in Jessamine County, and we're having students moving in from all over the country. And I had not seen that before. Now, when I lived in Washington, my husband was in the military. And so we had people moving from all over the world. And so we had a little bit more of that over there because kids were getting behind because they were moving so often. Well, now we're having kids moving in from different states. We have students whose parents have been missionaries, who are now coming back. They've been homeschooled, and now that they're back in the States, they want them back in a public school system, and found out that they were significantly struggling. So we high-tracked it through an RTI process to get that student services before they went back out of the country again, to get them some support so they can see some success when they moved back out again for the next missionary. I mean, they were supposed to leave again this year, but because of COVID, they weren't. So we're actually going to have him for 2.5 years to help him a little bit more.
Well, Mrs. Richardson, you have just been a real blessing. Thank you for helping us. Thank you for sharing your talents and skills. Thank you for working with some of these students that are online here tonight, maybe as a cooperating teacher in 1 or 2 or 3 years.
I
You
look
have been
forward to seeing you.
Yeah, you have been a blessing. So we'll see everybody here at our final seminar of the semester, which will be in March, and we will get that information out to you. Let's close with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, these are difficult times for college students and for college professors and for high school LBD teachers. We can only imagine how difficult these times are for regular students and then students that have an IEP. Help us to be aware of the needs of others around us. And we thank you for the opportunity that you've given us tonight to learn about ways in which we might be able to meet some of those special needs. Amen. See everybody. Thanks. We'll put the recording up in the next day or 2 or 3.
Miss Richardson?
Yes.
I have a question. Do you by chance know Brent Richardson?
That's my husband.
Okay. I actually am, my co-teacher right now works at Brookside Elementary. So I see him all the time.
And Mattis, so you know his service on Mattis.
I knew as soon as you said your husband was in the military, I was like, wait a second. I think her husband is Brent.
Yep, that's my husband.
Cool. My name's Paige, and he knows who I am. If you say Paige, he'll know who I am. So
we are now like the Jessamine County special ed rock stars, but the pair of us.
Yeah. I know. Yes, that's awesome. I didn't know that you were also working with LBD. So cool. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And Paige is going to be an LBD teacher.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, if you need high school experience, let me know.
Okay. Thank you so much for tonight.
Or we're going to have job openings if next year at West High, if you're in the area.
Okay. I'll keep that in mind.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
See, and you thought you wouldn't be able to fill up the time, and you went over 10 minutes.
I know. I'm sorry. I felt bad.
No. Don't be sorry. That was better than I ever imagined. That was just one of the best we've ever had. So thank you so much.
Anytime. I have lots of professional developments. I mean, I used to go to the state conference and present all the time. So anytime.
We may use you again, because obviously that's a big talk. If I had my way, which I'm not going to have my way, but if I had my way, at least every elementary graduate of Asbury would also have LBD licensure. Because I tell my kids, I do too. I tell my kids all the time, even if you never want to teach it, you're going to have those students in your room. The more that you know about how you can help them, the better you'll be. So thank you so much. I always
claimed to be an elementary teacher.
Oh, I
never thought I'd be a high school teacher. So
thank you.
You never know.
I'll see you on Facebook.
Bye. Yep.